Hello, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are, of course, reading Peter Kreeft's A Refutation of Moral Relativism, Interviews with an Absolutist, this time talking about Chapter 10, or Interview 10, The Philosophical Assumptions of Absolutism. Getting very near the end of the book, as we were just saying before we started recording. Only one chapter left, so only one more episode in this season. And we're also in person today for the first time in, I guess, a couple months, just about.
I guess, yeah.
It's probably since the end of January, or mid-January.
Yeah, we'll be in person on the next week, too.
Yes, for the season finale.
Because you are back in town.
Yes.
As the
song goes.
Yeah, Thin Lizzy's favorite. My favorite Thin Lizzy song. Only Thin Lizzy song I know.
Is that who does it?
I think so.
Right.
Boys are back. Boys are back in town.
I had no idea. I had no idea that was the name of the band.
Thin Lizzy.
Yes. Thank you for asserting that. So
I'm almost certain of it. And I think I have that on vinyl.
I'm sure you do. What do you think of this chapter about the assumptions about absolutism here?
It was short,
mm-hmm.
So that part I liked.
Yes, you always do.
I do. I do like short chapters. I think it's good the author covered it, mm-hmm. because I think it's, a little more honest, because there are certain assumptions,
mm-hmm.
But although I would say it kind of seems like it glossed over, it was really more of an argument, kind of restating some of the other arguments. Sure. But I enjoyed it. It was a good exchange between the two fictional characters. What were your thoughts?
I agree. I mean, I like, the overall message about how fundamental metaphysics has to be, how much you understand, what exists.
Yes.
I think is very important. And I like that he spends some time talking about that here.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So the discussion kicks off with, like an introductory thing between these two fictional characters who are discussing, Libby is the liberal or left-wing moral
mm-hmm.
relativist character who is interviewing Isa, something like that. ISA, who is the moral absolutist and a fictional, I think he said he's Muslim.
Yes.
Right.
Muslim.
About the philosophical assumptions of absolutism, because he went through and refuted, or at least attempted a valiant effort at refuting the philosophical assumptions of moral relativism. Mm-hmm. So in fairness, their conversation, this fictional conversation, is about, well, what are the philosophical assumptions of absolutism? There are some. Mm-hmm. And so they basically started to go through that. And the second page, I actually have a note there referencing you.
Oh. Because,
he mentions, kind of as an introductory thing, if we're just considered to be apes, then we should just ape the apes, which I thought was a clever turn of phrase. But he basically makes the point is that you have to look at the metaphysical basis and the assumptions of a moral philosophy in order to really understand it. And this quote is at the top of 151, where he says, because what you think goodness is and what you think humanity is and what you think being is depend on how you think on what thinking is, which is kind of deep and somewhat repetitive and maybe absurd. I don't know. But that's really an explanation of what they're talking about in this chapter. And he mentions, epistemology, mm-hmm. which I always have a hard time defining, but, basically he's saying, the presumption here is you can know the truth. Mm-hmm. In other words, skepticism has to be refuted, which is where I have a reference to you, because you hated the skeptics.
Yes, I do hate the skeptics.
Who say you can't know anything.
Yes.
And they prance around, At least I envision them prancing. Don't you think skeptics would prance around and say, you can't know anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the of philosophy, so I would say so.
I know that song to be Nanny Nanny Boo Boo, Stick Your Head in Dog Do.
I never heard that version
Really?
Growing up, yeah. I don't know if we ever attached words to it.
Or is it dog poo? I think it's Nanny Nanny Boo Boo, stick your face in dog poo.
Thank you for that, I guess.
Well, you started me down that path.
Fun fact there. I don't think I really did. I think
you said nanny, nanny,
okay,
nanny,
sure.
nanny, boo boo, right? Isn't that what you said?
I just said na 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 na.
Oh, okay.
And then you took it in your own direction.
Yes,
it's great, Dad.
So he's saying, okay, well, and she asked for a short refutation of skepticism. Mm-hmm. And as he's done with everything else, he says, well, it's self-contradictory.
Yes.
But he does very quickly kind of remind us that if you're a skeptic, you're saying, is it true that there is no truth?
Mm-hmm.
How can you say there is no truth and assert that as a truth?
Yeah.
Or is it certain that we can never be certain? Well, how can you be certain that you can never be certain?
Yeah.
Then you're like nanny nanny boo boo, stick your head in dog doo.
Yes, that's
to
good.
the skeptics.
True.
Because I think that's a really good argument
Yeah.
against. And he talks about, she mentions like Socrates. He makes a good point that Socrates was a skeptic by temperament,
but not by
philosophy. And he hated the skeptics, or not hated, but he was opposed to the skeptics who were called what? Not skeptics,
the
but
sophists.
Sophists.
Yeah, sophists
yes.
at the time. Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, skeptics are just the people who are questioning things, and like, I mean, to an extent. But you can question something and be like, why is this in place? We should be looking for the higher truth of this. That doesn't make you a skeptic. That makes you the opposite of a skeptic.
I think that is also true of my view of being a cynic.
Yes.
Like I'm a cynic by temperament,
Sure.
but not by philosophy.
Yeah, probably.
Because I am cynical with regard to what people will do if given power, but I believe that there are certain ideals that they should uphold.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that
I'm
makes
not a
sense.
complete cynic. Although maybe I should be. I don't know. If I were to form my own religion, it would be the religion of cynicism.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
I had played around with the idea of creating my own religion.
No, we've talked about that
I didn't
before.
know. I didn't know if I had.
I think several times. I think it comes up fairly often.
Really?
It's come up at least a few times.
Maybe 3 over all seasons. Has not come up this season.
I guess not. You're always welcome to enlighten us.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Your religious principles.
I never really got that far.
You just like the idea.
Well, at first,
yes.
Yeah, but then
then it's too much work.
Well, the whole blasphemy thing, it's high risk.
It's hard to start a new religion when you're a firm believer in one already, and you don't want to.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I wasn't.
Well, I guess that's fair.
So, but still, the blasphemy thing is kind of like you don't toy around with people's religious beliefs by creating because if you're creating something that it's not from God, you're just making it up. Yeah. You're just really a big con
artist. You convince yourself that it was, divine reason of some sort. I think there's people throughout history who have done that.
Really?
I mean, I think it's possible.
Probably.
I think so. I mean, there's people who's like, oh, well, this is a revelation. This must be, the core of philosophy that all people must practice now. It's like the Stoics. Because I think a lot of people forget like the religious element there, but they believed, I mean, it's a similar idea to deism, but they believed sort of logos was like the ultimate good, which just means word in Greek.
Yeah.
It's like there's just a divine order to the universe. And that's something I think you can reason your way towards, and you can convince yourself that it is true. Yeah. So I don't think, the first Stoic who was, oh man, I'm forgetting his name, but the reason it's called Stoicism.
Steve Stoic? I don't know.
No, it's not named after a guy. It's named after the Stoa. Because he would sit in the Stoa, and that's where people go to hear him.
Yeah, interesting.
So there you go.
I was going to say something. This is what I was going to say. I've been thinking about this lately.
The Stoa Poikile, by the way. Painted Stoa. If you were curious.
I'm a little unnerved by we haven't really had any recognized prophets since Jesus.
Well, there's nothing left to prophesy.
Is there a second coming or something?
Well, yeah, we have Revelation.
Yeah, but shouldn't there be some prophets, warning us like they warned the Jews?
I mean, I don't think so. We already had that.
I think there should be somebody reminding us. Don't you think?
I mean, we could be reminded. That doesn't mean it's a prophecy.
I guess that's true. It wouldn't be a prophet.
I think we go to mass, and I think that's like the reminder. Pretty frequently.
But like I'm talking about, like there's nobody out there wearing sackcloth saying repent sin. Maybe this.
I mean, there are people out there doing
that. Just ignoring them. The guy outside of Walmart yelling at us. But in my defense, I can't understand a word he's saying.
He's speaking in tongues, Dad.
Maybe he is. But I'm like a lot of people. I want to hear what he has to say, but I don't want him to know that I'm listening. So
that's the problem.
Yeah. So if you put your window down and you kind of pay attention, then I don't really want him to look at me.
Yeah.
Which is probably what happened to the prophets back in the day. They just kind of people want to go about their business. So maybe this guy's a prophet, although I haven't seen him in months.
Well, I mean, there's some denominations that believe that they still have prophets. But I mean, Catholics don't believe that like prophets are still a thing. Because I mean, a lot of like the more charismatic faiths, the more charismatic denominations. There's prophetic painters. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Prophetic painters.
Yeah, they like go to like their mega church conferences and
Really?
they let their hand guide their painting, and it's a prophecy.
I've heard that elephants and apes can do the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
There was that one. Wasn't there one like one animal would throw a tennis ball covered in paint canvas?
I'm sure that's possible.
No,
I've never heard
at a
of that.
zoo, and they would be like, people would pay all sorts of money for it.
I know there's elephants that they've trained to do that.
I had friends in high school that used to use a Ouija board, and they would swear that they were not controlling it. Yeah. And I thought, why would you have to have your hands on it? If if these spirits are really talking to you, why don't they just move the damn thing?
That's true. That's a good idea.
Because
point.
that was a cynic in nature.
There
and
you go.
that I never did, because I was like, you know what?
Yeah, why mess with it?
Well, yeah, I think you're all just somebody's screwing with somebody, or you're just foolish, or you're summoning spirits.
Yeah.
They might.
I don't want to take the risk. Yeah, I don't believe that it happens, but I don't want to test it.
I had some weird friends back then.
Apparently,
yeah, they were a strange group.
Yeah.
Well, they were strange. They were my friends. So
you already have to be.
Was it George Burns that said I would never join a club that would have me as a member?
That's wise. All right, should we get back to the book?
So then they talk about epistemology.
Yes.
Which is not what the listener is thinking. It is about what you can know.
Yes. And they go...
filthy, filthy mind.
Yes.
So there's the difference between epistemological
yes.
realism and epistemological idealism. I think I put an extra syllable in there.
No, I think that was right. You just really over-enunciated.
And idealism, he doesn't like idealism.
Yes.
Because it's basically... he talks about Locke and Kant.
Yeah.
And basically, it's all theoretical. Like Locke's idea that you can't really know anything. You know it, but it's not independent of the object that you're looking at.
Yeah, because he says an idea is just the object of knowledge. So there's nothing external that exists. It's just I forget how he phrases it. But it's like, it's only because we have knowledge of something, therefore we can put a name to it. Right. It's not that there's an outside thing that we have knowledge of. It's just the idea itself.
And I like this one statement that he has in 152 where he says, Libby, the character Libby says, what's wrong with that? Of course, morality is a set of ideas, and he says, because he's talking about, it has to have some basis in fact. He says, no, it's not. Knowing moral ideas isn't knowing real morality any more than knowing elvish ideas is knowing real elves. So that was, a good turn of phrase in explaining, the theoretical problems with that. And he talks about, I thought you liked this, about actually using words to describe things. And I've gone on this rant a few times where, we used to use objective words for moral
he
terms.
Says, that's why the words ideals and values became popular only after Locke and Kant. They're nice, soft, squishy words. I like that word. They feel subjective. And he says objective words like good and evil and virtue and vice are what they used before. Strong, hard words like law and sin and righteousness.
Yes.
Clear and simple words that you couldn't escape.
Yes.
And I really like that idea, and I think that's very prevalent now with with how people choose to frame moral concepts. And he talks about that a little bit later, but you can't even call anything unnatural now because we can't even agree on what's natural for humans, or we don't want to admit what's natural.
And I think this year, this is going to be a turning point in really a history of philosophy in modern West and in our nation, because of those terms, because you'll see people that are apt to use good and evil in describing certain criminal acts or certain ideals and philosophies and political opinions. And then the other side is using those squishy terms as moral relativism.
Well,
really
I was talking to
moral relativism and moral absolutism.
I know I was telling you, but the story, at Biden's State of the Union, he called the illegal immigrant who killed Laken Riley. He called him an illegal, and that's
he also
the word
killed Laken Riley Lincoln. But
yes, that's another issue. But then a couple days later, he went and had an interview, and he apologized for calling that guy an illegal. He said, I should have used the word undocumented person, and I never want to have any disrespect towards any of them. like, oh, the murderer that killed an innocent, 22-year-old college student. You don't want to disrespect that guy. We have to apologize for using the wrong word for him. And it's like weird. That exact concept. You have to use the right, nice words. You can't use the wrong ones. That's a bigger sin than, calling out a murderer.
And the use, and this is, the media really created this monster, which is the undocumented immigrants, because it used to be illegal alien. That's a legal term. Mm-hmm. That's what an alien doesn't mean you're from outer space. It means you're from another country and you came here. You're an alien in this land. And they're either legal or illegal.
It comes from the Latin word alius, which just means other. So from another place.
Correct. And so then they said, well, they're undocumented migrants or undocumented immigrants. Well, they're not undocumented. They're documented foreign citizens. And the Republicans, conservatives, and truth tellers and the media should have said, no, we don't care about the AP style instructions, which is really how they put this down our throats. Mm-hmm. And New York Times using it, and Washington Post, everybody should have pushed back and said, no, if you don't want to use illegal aliens, and the Catholic Church doesn't like it because they say, well, no person's illegal. Well, I get that argument, but a trespasser is a trespasser.
Yes.
And it's because of what you're doing, not who you are.
Yes.
You have to have a category of citizens and non-citizens if you have nation states, just like you have categories of Catholics Catholics when you're distributing communion.
Yes.
We're all Catholics, part of the Catholic Church in a way, because there's little c Catholics, even by their faith, but our faith. But, some are, you're the baptized Catholic and you're confirmed and you have a first communion, all that stuff. Anyway, so that I think is more offensive, and he obviously was pushed by Marjorie Taylor Greene shouting at him. Yes. From what I understand, I didn't watch the speech. I just watched
that's what happened. I saw
it, I at first I'm kind of like aggravated by this rude behavior, because it just can't there be any sort of decorum in any of these? And just show up and listen to the speech. However, I hate the State of the Union.
Yes,
it should be a written speech and should be submitted just like George Washington did. And so my thought is, I want more outbursts now, because if it becomes total chaos.
Well, Biden was just, I only watched about the first hour and a half and it was long. But he was really combative too in the first place. It was a really aggressive, really weird sort of jumping all over the place State of the Union to begin with, as you would expect from Biden. So it's just a weird experience all around.
Well, so I'm hoping for more chaos as the years go by. So finally people just throw up their hands and like, no, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. Because we don't need to do it. It's a spectacle, and it's treating the president as if he's a king or a queen, if we have a female president at some point. And I don't like the royalty of it. Yeah. I don't like that we call President Trump because he used to be president. He should. I don't like that. I don't like calling President Clinton president. It's not a title. Yeah. I don't like calling retired judges judge. Although I do if I know them well, just as a familiar. I don't know who they are. They're Steve or they're Doug, They're no different than me now. Yes. You're off the bench. I don't have to stand up when you come in the room. Anyway. Angry old man. Angry old lawyer. Especially now that there are people that are younger than me that are frequently becoming judges. And I'm like, I knew you when you were like an idiot lawyer. And that was 2 weeks ago before you get appointed. Now I'm saying, yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but that's not the law. That's great. Anyway. That's
back to Locke and Kant.
Yes. Objective words, good and evil. Yes. And then we were talking about, okay, go ahead if you have something.
I was just going to move on to Kant. I mean, I think we talked about Locke. And I do like the point he makes. He says, if you go with the whole ideas, then, all that anybody knows is ideas and everything else is only an inference from them. It's like judging reality from pictures instead of judging pictures by reality. Like a prisoner in a room without windows watching a TV screen all day without ever being allowed to go outside. If everything's just an idea. Then he moves on to Kant, and that's the idea that the consciousness structures reality instead of vice versa, that man creates all the form and shape and meaning of the world in the act of knowing it, like an artist instead of a scientist.
I did like, when I studied Kant, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But it's like one of those theoretical arguments. Then you go back to the real world when you're done reading it. It's like, but it doesn't really help you. It's like, it doesn't even explain reality. It's an interesting theoretical construct, but it doesn't really give you any practical knowledge about what's good or bad. So it kind of fails, in my opinion, as an ethical theory.
And he does give Kant some credit, because he says, Kant didn't justify like a kind of do your own thing morality. He tried to justify moral absolutism. He tried to prove that moral law was both necessary and universal, even though he denied it was objective.
Right.
Because again, he's this idea that, all the meaning we get is based like essentially on our interpretation of things. It's not because the thing in and of itself is objectively, this concept. And so he removes the objectivity of it, but he tried to keep the necessity and the universality of it. But then once you remove the objectivity, cornerstone there, then the rest kind of falls away and leads to other philosophers taking away the other two.
Well, and he gets to that point in 154. He says, if we can't know objectively real things in themselves, then we can't know whether there is any objective reality. And if you don't have that base of knowledge, then what's the point of having a moral philosophy? Because you don't even know what knowledge is. As he talks about, it's like a universal dream state or something, and we're our own judge and jury because we're creating this stuff in our own mind, these concepts in our mind about what reality is, and that, like I said, it doesn't really do any good to try to figure out what's right or wrong, other than like appeals to some sort of God or authority. And I did like it. Obviously the author is a fan of medieval scholastic thought. With the principles of intelligibility, which is, there's a certain intelligence and human capacity for reason to understand the world around us. And I think I'm coming right down on that. Yeah. I think because anything else is just absurd. Yeah. What's the point of anything else? You become more fatalist or determinist.
I mean, it's like what you said, like there's other philosophers who have given, interesting and detailed accounts of like how we connect, concepts to what we see and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything. Right. It's like what you were saying about Kant, it doesn't actually change the way that we view the world, like any way in the processing and stuff. So it's like, okay, well, where does this get me?
Yeah, I need more of a roadmap. Yeah, I don't need to know that Chicago is so many hundreds of miles from here. I need to know, okay, what road do I take? And which do I take a left or right at these different turns? I don't need to know. Well, you have to go northeast so many miles. I mean, I think that's kind of like this 10,000 foot philosophy. This theoretical stuff doesn't do much for me. Never did, and that's why when I was at my end of my studies in undergrad, I'm just like, I just want this over. I just want the degree so I can go into something else. Now, what I was going to do at that, I don't know. But
be a manager at Sam's Club, or a street philosopher.
Part-time street philosopher, full-time manager. Although by the time I was at that career in my retail business, I was like, I hate humanity. Anybody who's worked years in retail will understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. I've never worked years, but I have worked some.
You have to work years to really hate people.
That's true. People became an annoyance for sure in my customer service job at Lowe's, which it was a fine job, but there were some interesting requests that we got constantly.
It's I'm telling you, it's different when it's a summer gig and okay, I've got to get through this. Yeah. When you actually have the real possibility of this is your life, it does change your attitude. Yeah, and I remember a certain level of hopelessness, back in the day. I wasn't making any money. I wasn't doing well in school. I didn't, I was just like, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do with my life. I don't know what I can do. Am I ever going to be able to buy a car?
And now you're here on like episode 150 something of the Limited Opinions podcast.
That's
with your
correct.
Son.
Yeah, with the son. I never thought I'd ever have a son. I was like, who was going to marry me? Bear my children. I don't even know. I didn't really want children. Well, we can go down to that a different path. Well, yeah. So we can have that. That's a whole different long rant and
I'm sure.
History of Mark Bishop's wayward thinking. All right. So, So, he talks about, I really like this quote. He's talking about, okay, how do you know stuff? And he says, because it doesn't come from our will. It comes from our experience, our data. It's real. This is not a quote, but from our data. It's not just from us. It comes to us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the heart of this argument. And it is an assumption. Yeah. You have to have, I mean, you're not God. So any moral philosophy has to have some assumptions. Yeah. And this is a pretty solid one, in my opinion. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if we wanted to talk more about that.
I mean, I think it's that's the exact problem we see with, how all of academia, everything is centered around, well, everything's just a social construct. And it's like, no, we didn't just, invent every single moral code. We didn't just invent all of these concepts. We have to have experienced them. We have to have seen them somehow, had, this knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. We did not just craft all of this ourselves and just decide upon it like it's some sort of democratic process on what is good and evil.
Yeah. And I don't understand how they can be so condemning of others too.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's just so contradictory, just weird. But then it kind of rattles off a couple of these philosophies that are terrible, basically. Nominalism, which is everything just has kind of like it just name everything,
and that's the basis
things.
For the social construct theories. Right. That everything's just a name that we've given to something. There's no higher truth than that. We've just agreed on the names for these concepts.
Right. And then materialism, which we've talked about in other chapters, we're just stuff.
Everything's matter.
And he mentions you have to have, and he kind of mentions it as an aside, but I think it's really the key point to the whole thing, which is. You have to believe that we have souls in order to have any sort of moral philosophy. Yeah. If you don't have a soul, then it's really just about utilitarianism. Mm-hmm. What's best for society, even if it is a moral code. Yeah. Determinism, which is just horrible. Which I had, I don't know, I bored you with stories before about a professor I had that believed in what he called soft determinism, which was we're determined like 90%. But because we're such complex creatures, we have been determined to have a certain limited amount of free will and choice.
Yeah, it's just a horrible philosophy.
And he really believed in it. And because I'm an ass, I took the position for an entire semester. Did I tell you about this?
I think that this has come up. I forget where this is going.
I took the position as if it were my own. And actually, I started convincing myself that in hard determinism, which is everything is determined. And so he talked about hard determinism and soft determinism, but he gave kind of like an example. I can't think of what it would be. I'd say, well, isn't it true that all these different factors could have led to this exact outcome as a determined, basically upon physical actions, whether it's psychological, maybe beat as a child, but these things happened. Yeah. These external forces acted upon this character and led that person to do this. How do you know? How can you possibly believe in determinism but believe there's some free will there when obviously these physical things cause that person to act in that manner? And you can certainly prove it if you had enough data. Yeah. And then he'd think about it, and we move on to something else. And then he'd start the next class with, I just want to say one last thing about this soft determinism, hard determinism argument that the student, Bishop brought up, and blah, 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 blah. I said, well, I have to raise my hand. I said, well, I have to say, blah, 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 blah. I mean, a counter argument. Yeah. And he'd be really frustrated. We blow the whole class, 50-minute class. And, but part of me, I always had a problem with people in positions of authority forcing their views on people. Yeah. And I didn't think it was a time or place. He had his views. He should have just stopped with an explanation.
Well, he was determined to tell you about them.
I actually made that argument.
I'm sure you did.
Because this went on for several classes. Where he'd start off trying to refute the last thing I said and then move on. And then I would raise my hand and I'd refute it. And there were audible groans from the other students. They didn't want to hear any of this. They just wanted to learn about whatever the next thing in the class was. And I said, then at some point, these groans, I said, well, obviously, you're determined. You're really determined to convince this class that you're right. Yes. For whatever reason, but there is a reason why you're determined to do that, that you have free will, even though you don't have free will. I bet that you were compelled to make this argument, that you felt it within you, that you had to convince me and this class that I was wrong. And he couldn't deny that because, boy, he really wanted to. I go, aha! Groans. They hated me. They absolutely detested me.
I wonder why.
I couldn't stop myself because I had to do it.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, it was entertaining for me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
No one else in that room liked me. just the fun of being me, I guess. And then there's behavioralism, which is very similar to what I was just describing. That we're products of our environment, and you can modify people's behavior with treats or punishments or whatever. And then he mentions pantheism, which is that we're all gods, all demigods in our world, and none of that really instructs us as to moral philosophy, and they're all horrible.
Yeah.
All
and I think
stuff.
it
destroys morality.
I think a lot of people now are kind of in a mix between determinism and behaviorism in regards to, all the stuff on like gender and race and everything. It's like you were predestined to have this lot in life because of the way that you were born, it was conditioned into you by society and your factors. And I think a lot of it is a denial of free will and a denial of the choices that you've made.
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous thing that a lot of people believe right now.
Well, and it is so stupid because they don't realize that when we line them up to execute them, we can say the exact. I'm not that we're going to do that.
Yes, obviously.
But if they're going to be lined up by their opponents and executed, their opponents can say, "Don't blame me. I've just been determined by my upbringing to hate you and kill you."
Yeah.
So how dare you say that I'm morally repugnant for murdering innocent people? And they don't understand the logical extension of their own arguments. Yeah. Which are dehumanizing. And I'm not saying, obviously I was joking, we're never going to execute those people, but the people that they disfigure, watch out. Yeah. 10 years from now, they're either going to be sued into bankruptcy, but I think you're going to see, maybe sooner than that, we're going to see it very soon. We're going to see a lot of these transgender kids that have been abused by their parents and these doctors killing them. Because why wouldn't you? Yeah. They've destroyed your life. And for a male, you take those puberty blockers, your sex organs are going to be always at age 11. Yeah. Pre-puberty. How do you live like that? Yeah. Oh, it's just horrible. It is. And I think there's really going to be violence. And if there's an author that, if anybody's listened to us this long, they'll probably be on my side anyway. But Kurt Schlichter, you need to read his books. Have you ever read his books?
I haven't read any. No.
Golly, gee whiz! So he has this dystopian future of America after like a civil war or something. But he talks about, going over to the left wing side of after the split of the United States. And the roving gangs of transgender kids hunting down the doctors. Yeah. And this was written years ago. And how prescient he was, how he envisioned that possibility, the widespread use of an abuse of these transgender, so-called transgender kids, and then having the ability to think ahead. Okay, what are these people going to be like in 10 years when they've been disfigured and they're in a lot of pain? Yeah. What are they going to want to do? They're going to want to kill some people, and man, I wouldn't, I'm not saying I'm condoning it, but I would understand it. But so, I think it's kind of like you reap what you sow. It's going to be tough. And I feel so bad for those kids. And at some point I'm going to have to step up and be on TV and saying, have your parents, had you prescribed with, these gender drugs, call me. I'll sue them, and I'll get a guardian appointed to you, so you don't have to take them anymore. Yeah.
Well, I know you know this, but we had Chloe Cole come to campus last semester, who's really outspoken on that issue because she was one of those ones whose parents were told, like, hey, your daughter's going to kill herself if you don't, help her with these issues she's facing and stuff. You don't, bring her to these doctors, and she's undergone those surgeries and been on those puberty blockers and stuff like that. And then, a few years later, she realizes, oh, I was just like mentally ill and I just had other problems. And they didn't ask. And they just assumed, okay, we'll take you at your word for it. You say that you're a boy, you're a boy. And if we don't give you these things, I guess, the only option then is suicide for you. Yes. So we better give you these things. Yeah. And it's just horrible.
Yeah. And I have a little bit of sympathy for parents because you never know. And you'll know this when you have kids. you never really know if you're doing a good job or not. I still don't know. I mean, you guys turn out great, so I must have done something right. But maybe you could have even been better. But I don't know, and you always doubt, and you always wonder. And if experts are telling you, and if your child has attempted suicide and is troubled, I could see you latching on to something pretty extreme, because that's the worst thing that you'd want is your child to die, certainly by their own hand. And if they tried, I get some of it to a point. But as soon as they say, we're going to permanently disfigure your child, there's no way. Yeah. There's no way that would happen. So I think I understand how it happens from the parent's point of view. So I blame them less. Yeah. The doctors know better. The nurses know better. And I want every one of them to suffer. Yeah. I want the doctors sued. I want the nurses sued. I want the hospitals sued. I want them to all be forced into bankruptcy. And then I want to file claims in bankruptcy court to exempt that from bankruptcy discharge. And I want to have forever garnish their wages. And I want them driven out of the medical field, lose their licenses, and then they could be street philosophers. I mean, they are horrible people. Yeah. They are abusing children, and those days are coming. And those doctors should be aware.
Because there's so much money in it too. I know that's been all the reports and stuff with people saying that. It's like, well, you can
about the money,
because you can say them and give them these very expensive medications and frequent checkups and all that stuff.
And what we need really passionate plaintiffs' attorneys who are going to go beyond the insurance policy limits and say, we're not going to settle for the policy limits. We're going after your personal assets. F you, we're not settling. We're going for your house, your car, all your stuff.
Sounds like you have a calling.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
But I don't do med mal.
Yeah.
I have a med mal case that I have a med mal lawyer handling. But you also need to have, in Missouri, I think it's pretty common, you have to have, in order to even file a case against a doctor for medical malpractice, you have to have an expert sign an affidavit that you have to have filed basically with your petition. So you have to have another doctor that's already ready to testify under oath. This doctor did not give you the standard of care. It's not like a car accident case. You just sue them and then you figure out the facts, right? With a doctor, because they have all these protections under the law. So really what these reforms for transgender stuff, really they want to stop them. I mean, all of it. You remove that protection for anybody doing transgender. And that, I'd sue the next day. I'd find a client because I won't need a doctor to sign the affidavit. I can use their own testimony when I depose them to convict them. You convict them in a civil case.
Interesting.
But that would be effective. Maybe I'll call up. I know some legislators. That's a good idea. Maybe I'll write something up. It started here on this podcast.
I can call up the Hawley.
Well, I mean, this would be state. This is state, not federal. And you're not going to get. It's not going to happen. But medical malpractice. I mean, that the federal statutes would have to do with federal cases. Yeah. I'm talking about the vast majority of them are state cases, so it'd be state law. Anyways, I'm going to write that down. Change the law, exempt them, because that would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And those doctors are screwed because the statute of limitations doesn't even start to run until the kid hits 18. So you've got a couple years past 18 for them to sue. Interesting. Depending on the appropriate statute of limitations. So they're ticking time bombs for these guys when they're dealing with 14 and 15-year-olds. Once they hit 18, they got a statute of limitations. So anyway, the early ones might be out of luck.
Yes.
But the ones that are getting abused now have a definite cause of action. But anyway, so what are we talking about? Going back to where we are.
There's one more philosophy that he wanted to point out. One more metaphysical philosophy. That was Cartesian dualism.
Oh yeah,
the idea that matter and the strict separation of matter and spirit. Matter's out there and takes up space and doesn't think. Spirit is in here and doesn't take up space and think, and they're not connected at all. And he says, well, that was the idea of the connection goes all the way back to Aristotle, and then Descartes sort of divorced those concepts. Right. And it's like, well, clearly we know that there has to be some connection between matter and our soul and what we think and feel. It's not just these two entirely separate planes of existence.
Yeah, but I don't think I don't think that's a prevalent thought, that it's separate.
Yeah.
You know,
a lot of them just deny that the spirit even exists.
Like a ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, correct.
It's much more likely to have that philosophy.
I don't know that there's a whole lot of people that really believe in that duality anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people maybe have a sense that, you know, you have a soul that is beyond your physical realm. But I think we all have some sort of intuitive thought, well, it interacts, you know. My experiences change my morality, you know.
Yeah.
And because otherwise your soul really wouldn't be affected by you murdering people, because that's just the physical things you've done, I would think.
I guess. Yeah.
So moving on, I did like this. You know, she talks about you know, all these other philosophies, and she mentions 160. So say you, but almost nobody else. So it's Catholics and Muslims against the world. And he says, well, that makes almost 3 billion, almost half the world. You add in the Orthodox Jews and Eastern Orthodox Christians and evangelicals and Mormons and some Confucians and Buddhism and even some Hindus, and you got a lot of people. So I thought that's kind of, actually, when you think about it, it's kind of reassuring that you have that larger group. I don't know if I skipped ahead too much. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because I do like how he ends that. He says, you know, that's not an extremist fringe. The media people always call us, quote, right-wing religious fundamentalists.
Right.
And that's the pejorative term, when really a lot of people believe in some form of moral absolutism, that there is some sort of natural thing for humans to be doing.
Yeah, and then and beyond that, the people that are not practicing, I think most Americans are moral absolutists. You know, when you really start asking them about their beliefs, they believe there is a truth and there is right and wrong. When you start getting to them, they disagree about what is right and what is wrong, especially our youth. Golly, geez. But in any event.
Yeah, because I know, because that's the point that he kind of makes throughout, too. It's like you really have to be a philosopher to really believe in relativism. You really have to be someone who just sits down and thinks about all of these things and is like, oh, well, what if, you know, this is all just a construct that we've created? And it's like, really, people don't actually believe that. We all have an idea of what is right and wrong. Right. You know, the ordinary person does. This is not an extreme opinion.
I think either that or you have to be somebody that doesn't even think about it at all. And you're just kind of, you've been taught things.
Yeah,
you just
that's
kind of regurgitate them, or... you know, there's a lot of people that it's surprising to me that there's so many people that don't even think about their own morality and their own belief system. But that's, I think, it's so much more common than I always think it is. Just because I sit around and think about it all the time doesn't mean everybody else does or even should to a certain extent. But I think a lot of people are just like, man, I got to pay the bills. You know, I got the kids diaper needs to be changed. I mean, you get busy with other stuff, but I think there's some people that kind of have a moral relativist belief system just because they haven't really thought about all the implications of it too. So, but anyway, but you're right. I mean, the people that really are true believers in it are the stereotypical ivory tower people. Yeah, no, exactly. Ivory towers. I'd like to have an ivory tower. Wouldn't you like to be up in an ivory tower?
I would like to have an ivory tower. That would be nice.
Especially if I had I could drop things on people that were, you know, like I have a moat around my ivory tower.
There you go. I do also like the point he makes, kind of going off of, you know, the idea that there's a lot of religious people who do believe in absolutism. And he does say, you know, that even atheists can be moral absolutists.
Sure.
He says, because even though God is in fact the real source of morality, our knowledge of God is not the only source of our knowledge of morality. He kind of makes the point that you can know essentially the effects without knowing all of the causes. You can be someone who just doesn't believe in God and still see, okay, well, we know that there are these moral truths and doesn't really investigate why.
Right.
And you can still believe in those things. There's you know, even the atheists, we can lump a lot of them in here too, because it's like sort of just the ordinary person who just thinks, you know, well, yeah, of course.
And he gives a good analogy of like a scientist who doesn't believe in God being the creator or there's being a first cause type thing, but they can study the secondary and tertiary causes.
You can still be a good scientist. You can still document a lot of what exists in the world, even if you don't believe in the first cause.
And you see a lot of I'm going to mention it because I haven't mentioned it yet this episode. COVID, with the masking people, a lot of them were atheists. You know, there's a lot of overlap between the left wingers and the masked people. They believed it was a moral cause and it was like a religion to them. It still is. Like you see some of the dead enders, the holdouts for masking and for vaccines and stuff. And it really is like a religious belief without God. This is the moral good, and I'm showing my morality by putting on this religious garb, which is a mask. Freaks. Anyway, I don't know if there's anything. So, he does make kind of a historical argument at the very end, a discussion of it, which is society always needed morality, and morality has always needed religion, because if you destroy religion, you destroy morality. Because you need that structure, that religious structure to shore it up. And if you don't have morality, you don't have a functioning society, and you really can't have a moral structure within your society without religion. And she mentions how there's no official religion in the United States.
Yeah.
But of course, the founders and anybody that studied American history knows how religious this country has been up until very recently.
Yeah.
And Europe was ahead of the curves, so to speak, in being not practicing a religion, but we're probably equal to them or getting close to what they were 20 years ago, with people just not going to church and not believing anymore.
Well, it's like, I kind of bring this up when I hear that argument, because it's like, people always like to point out Thomas Jefferson. It's like, well, not all the founding fathers were Christians. They didn't want a Christian nation, et cetera, because, Thomas Jefferson was a deist. But Thomas Jefferson still absolutely believed in Christian morality.
Correct.
He didn't believe that Jesus was God, and he went to great lengths to write his own version, of the New Testament that, scrubbed any mention of Jesus being God, but still enforced the Christian morals. And so he still recognized that those were vital for, a society to function, to have an agreed upon set of principles that you act with, even if you didn't believe in Christianity per se.
Well, the more I know about Thomas Jefferson, the more I think he's a freak anyway.
Yeah, no, he was a freak. Right. But I mean, I'm just saying.
It's really Madison that wrote this stuff.
Yes.
I mean, Madison was the brains behind it. It's like he's like the Wizard of Oz, with all the gears and the
strings, and the man behind the curtain.
Put the curtain, close the curtain.
Yeah, it's like people like to point him out. It's like, well, we weren't all Christians, but he still absolutely believed that Christian morality was important.
He was always going broke.
Yes.
Because he's always buying.
And he loved the French Revolution.
Oh, yeah. Yes. It was long past when he knew. He should have known. He knew.
Well, he just loved France. He was a weird, a
Francophile.
Yes, he was.
Well, I kind of understand it. If you're a revolutionary, they saved Americans' butts.
Yes.
So I get that, because if they would have lost that war, they would all been executed. So I understand emotional attachments, but once it's not refuted that they're guillotining people en masse, not like in a religious mass, but like in a group, groups, and they're killing priests and nuns. It's like, man.
Yeah. Well, that kind of came up. I know I told you, but for anyone listening to the podcast, we had a lovely, up at school, I'm the chairman of the College Republicans. We had a lovely debate with our communist club. And during Q&A, the topic came up because the communists took a very hard pro-violence stance. I think I told you about that. They're consistent communists. They think that Stalin and Lenin and Mao did everything right, essentially, and that violence is an inherent good and necessary for the communist utopia, which is what Marx believed.
Yes.
But a lot of modern communists are like, well, we could just vote it in and it'll just happen.
Right.
But no, they're consistent to what Marx believed, and they say violence is necessary. And of course, I'm like, well, no, that's crazy. Violence isn't necessary for a system, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And then the question came up of, well, how do you defend the American Revolution then? That was a violent start to this country.
Yes.
And of course, the point I made is, well, the Republican system, the system of a Republican government does not necessitate violence to continue to exist.
Yes.
The communists are saying you need violence to continue to keep this system in operation. You need to quell opposition, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
and that's
true.
when things go, south with other revolutions, is to keep using violence.
Yes.
It's just crazy.
Well, and I'm not an expert in American history, but they sent certain demands to the king first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It wasn't just this is our only choice. Now we have to kill the British.
Revolution always and forever. And it still amazes me that anybody would follow those philosophies. I mean, you talk about Mao. I mean, Stalin was a mass murderer for sure.
Yes.
Mao, I mentioned to you before, I think I might have mentioned in the podcast, I'm trying to plow through this 600-page tome of biography of Mao. And it's hard because he just kills everybody. He's just such a murderer.
Yeah.
I mean, he would
well, the communists
kill his own allies if they're rivals, just to secure power. And during the war with Japan, he specifically orders people not to fight Japan because the nationalists were taking the brunt of the action, and he wanted to just after the Japanese, and they had cooperative agreements. So the Japanese would sweep in to an area, and the communists would follow up and put outposts in there to take over control of it in the rear of the Japanese army. It's crazy.
Yes. Well, the Mao came up at this stupid event that we had. Oh, the communists said it wasn't Mao's fault. He just made some policy errors, and then people died in the Great Leap Forward.
Well, I haven't even gotten to the Great Leap Forward in that book. I'm still in the...
but no, Mao,
now I'm in the Civil War.
But according to them, Mao did nothing wrong, so I hope you keep that in mind.
Mao didn't do anything right. I mean, really, he was just
horrible.
So evil.
They think he was better than Stalin. They think he did communism better than Stalin, so I don't know. Because Stalin, well, according to them, this is what I got from their religious credo of communism. But Marx said you have to go feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. What they said Mao did right is he cut out the middleman. He said we don't even need capitalism. They went from the feudal society of China and then tried to enforce communism, statewide. And so they say he was a better communist because he cut out the middleman. And then killed millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta break a few eggs if you're gonna make an omelet.
That's what they say. Violence is a good thing to the communists.
It's just almost unbelievable.
Yes, I don't know how we got on that topic. I don't know what we were talking about.
But it's just so depressing that there's anyone anywhere that would say there's anything redeeming about Mao. Yeah. I mean, he's like one of those really unique characters that is just so horrible. He's worse than Hitler. Because at least Hitler tried to improve his country in his own way, right? Because he believed in the German race as being superior. He was a nationalist. At least he believed in something. Mao just wanted to murder people and wanted power. Yeah. I mean, he was just so destructive of everything. Oh, well, the inverse Midas touch.
Yeah, it's like the Beatles say: if you go around carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you're never going to make it with anyone anyway. How?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any other final thoughts? No, I've gotten you on a lot of rants today.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, this is...
I should have had so many rants.
That's all right. We have one more episode left, so if you have any book suggestions, you can, of course, tweet them at us at ULMTD Opinions. I threw out the suggestion of Moral Politics by George Lakoff, who's a cognitive linguist and essentially argues through a series of, something that liberals and conservatives have inherently different linguistic metaphors for how they view politics, and that shapes their political worldview, which could be interesting. Yes. I don't know how technical it is, but that's a suggestion.
I'm not opposed to that.
All right. Well,
and due to my own laziness, that's probably what we'll end up doing.
Probably. All right. Well, this has been Season 7, Episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
Good episode.
It's a long one.
No. 10:15 at night.